Rappin with ReefBum is sponsored by Bulk Reef Supply and Ecotech Marine.
Hey, what's happening, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Rappin with ReefBum. I'm your host, Keith Berkelhamer. So today I welcome Shane Danger Coleman from Sustainable Reefs in Australia. What's happening there, Shane?
Hey, you go, mate. Yeah, we're just upstairs at work, the Sustainable Reefs facility, and yeah, just it's a fairly standard work day. At the moment, we're doing a big spring clean, so well, the boss is down there with his hands wet, and I'm up here doing a live stream, so I kind of get out of it for a while.
Well, you're gonna give us a little bit of a tour pretty soon there, just to kind of give folks an idea of the facility. Before we do that, though, let me just thank the sponsors for this show, both Bulk Reef Supply and Ecotech Marine. Really appreciate these companies supporting the live stream, and I also appreciate all you folks out there tuning in. And as always, please drop your questions and comments in the chat. We'd love to make this interactive. And of course, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel while you're at it. That would be awesome. So, Shane, man, it's like Friday morning there, right? I mean, you're 15 hours ahead of me here on the East Coast of the United States. What does kind of like a typical work day for you entail, like in that facility there? What's something different every day, or?
Yeah, it can be anything from packing an order, making a stock list. Currently, we're building some new systems, so it's a whole big system that I think it'll be about 10,000 liters when it's finished, and a section of that will actually be dedicated to the Reef Legacy project, the biobank that you spoke to Dean Miller about. So that's we're trying to kick that system up pretty quickly so we can take some of their corals on. But otherwise, we need to expand because the demand for frag corals is getting up there, so we need more space. But yeah, we can be plumbing, fiberglassing, fragging corals, doing online stuff like this, or yeah, the day is so varied, you never really know what you're going to do until a few hours before it.
Gotcha. So, keeps it interesting. So Shane, just for the folks out there that don't know what Sustainable Reefs is all about, can you just kind of give a broad, general overview of what you guys are all about?
Right. Well, it's a coral farm. We stopped wild collection probably 2 years ago now, so we rely solely on the corals that we have, and we sometimes buy in new, I guess you'd say, brood stock or something if it's a new different color or something interesting that we don't have on the farm, that we can bring that in and we can then grow that out. So everything here is grown over multiple generations, as we call them. So frags from frags from frags. And that's that side of it. But the main reason for the existence of this coral farm is that it's a R&D or research and development for Coral Essentials, the product line that we make out of, we research and make it and make sure that it works with corals and test it on a large scale. So that's pretty much the majority of the stuff here is testing chemicals. So
cool. So, I mean, how long have you been in the reef keeping industry? What was your journey like up until where you're at today?
So I guess you'd say professionally or permanently you shouldn't say permanently, you never know what's going to happen, but professionally in the industry now for about 5 years. But prior to that, it was about 10 odd years of just having have my toes dipped in or knee deep into it, working with other wild collection companies just because they were family friends, and just dabbling in the industry, but not anything heavy. But now that I'm well invested into it, so that, and then as a hobbyist, I think all up maybe 20 something years doing as a hobbyist. But so that's and up the lead into that, what I was basically a vehicle body manufacturer, engineering type trade, welding and all sorts of things like that. And that was what I was doing. And I'd come home to a reef tank and yeah, I just got more and more invested in it as the years went by, and I was able to throw that career away
Yeah.
and start this. So.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. So, all right, I think I want to ask you to give us a tour, but before we do that, man, got to get this out of the way. Can we assume that your middle name Danger was not your given middle name, or was it? What's the story behind that?
No, it's not my given middle name, but I've been. It's on the very long to-do list of things I'd like to change it legally. I don't hate my middle name, but I don't know. It's just the danger thing. It come around when I was working in the vehicle body industry, and I don't even know where it just stuck. And now heaps of my friends just refer to me as Danger or Shane Danger. So, but they don't even use my last name anymore. It's either just Shane Danger. Danger's sort of become a last name now, not even a middle name. But yeah, it's but no, it's yeah, it definitely wasn't given that at birth, but it would have been cool.
Yeah, that would have been a kick-ass birth name.
Yeah. I do a lot of stupid things.
I was going to ask you, like, you know, is that something that do you try to live up to that nickname, like especially when you're diving or something?
Yeah, there's always something risky or stupid to do. Got to keep the adrenaline up. So.
Yeah, for sure. I got you, man. All right, so yeah, if you can give us kind of a tour of the facility, that would be awesome, and then we can kind of like you know, ask you a bunch of questions. So yeah, take it away. Take it away, man.
So let's head downstairs and do a bit of a camera flip. Oh, there's a lawnmower going on outside.
Yeah, we hear some. There we go.
Sorry about that. Right, so anyway, this is one of the tanks. We've got the lights up at the moment because we're all trying to get in here and work around. There's a lot of like freshly fragged Generation 2 ACAMs.
Are those LED strip lights? Is that what those are?
Yeah. These are Illumagic Vitamini. We use a lot of them, as you can see.
Yeah.
A lot of Illumagic lighting. But there's yeah, I'll try and I should have killed the flow off first, but it's all right. Yeah, there's a lot. I've just freshly organized this. We're just cleaning tanks and going through, but yeah, there's a lot of corals in here.
Wow, man, that's awesome. I love the color coordination too. You know.
Oh yeah, you've got to keep them all grouped up because if you know, you get your warfare and stinging going on, so everything needs to be in groups, and that helps me keep check on stock numbers as well. So like certain corals I don't need too many of, so I'll just keep like 30 of them, and certain corals I need heaps of, like red lobos, so I always need to have heaps of that on hand. Anything white plugs are freshly fragged, like these. So these are all Acantharia pachycepta, and they're all just grown. So
nice.
They've all grown from frags, and they're all encrusted over. Well, there's a pretty good one. It's encrusted over that base there. LPS fragging is my specialty. That's and growing the LPS. On that, this is the filtration system for the tanks behind me. So all of those tanks there and the little end ones, they're all. This is the filtration for that. So we got a monstrous skimmer here. That's a big Beckett drive skimmer with about a 2 meter or actually it's about nearly a 7 foot head height on bubbles.
Wow.
These are some test tanks that we run, and I can isolate them, and they're running different chemicals in at the moment that I think could be toxic to aquariums. So we're going to see what they do to corals, basically. We run big full pumps. A lot of people do. Biomedia reactor tower. That's a 5,000 litre, but I don't know what that is in gallons. Sorry, divide that by 4,000, 1,200 gallon, I guess. That's our water storage for natural seawater. Because yeah, we are lucky to live in North Queensland, so we have the reef kind of at our doorstep.
So you're grabbing the water from the reef.
Yeah, and then we filter it through a micron filter and get all the little particles out of it, and we go from there. There's a handy view box there. So these are ACANs and whatnot. I mean, everything is that's really hard to see. Hang on, let's just bring that out there. So yeah, everything we have, make sure it's all encrusted. For goodness. So this is another system. We're just filtered via filtration over there. Different lights, entirely different ball game, because this is a predominantly LPS system.
Okay.
We do all the encrusting Monties, acros, that kind of thing, and Gonnies. We treat Goniophora like acro here, but we feed it, or target feed it. But yeah, Gonny here just goes really, really well along with acro. So we do, they're all fully encrusted. And yeah, we
how long do you
made that little...
How long do you typically grow out your LPS before you kind of bring stuff to market in terms of frags?
I mean, it's not a necessity, but I really like to have my corals encrusting or growing. Like typical sale size is something that's like that. These here are freshly trimmed down because they actually overgrow to something like that, and that doesn't fit in our frag bags. So once they get overgrown, I just trim the excess off and turn it into new frags. But it depends entirely on the coral as to what basically what time frame, sorry. So yeah, and then this system over here is what we call the soft coral system. It's predominantly leathers and zoanthids, rickordia, mushrooms at the back there, and yeah, just lots of zoanthids.
Wow.
And yeah, so and this system here is the one we're building next. I just finished this fiberglass sump. I shouldn't say just, it's been sitting around way too long. And that's all going to a new system there. And there'll be new tanks running off this way. But yeah, well, I will, that's pretty much the farm. Yeah, feel free to ask any questions about filtration and such on that. But
yeah, folks.
I was trying to get out of the noise because the council's doing a big cleanup out the front.
Oh, gotcha.
So,
yeah, folks, feel free to drop questions in the chat to Shane there, and yeah. So go ahead, man.
We split the systems up for redundancy as well. So, like if we have a problem with a certain coral, so every system. So there's currently 3, and there's about to be 4. With the new one, and every system has at least so like there'll be a majority of Acropora of one species in the Acropora system, but in the other system that I showed first, there's a backup copy of all of that. So if something should happen to the majority, we have the backup copy as well, and everything is done with redundancy because we have had disasters in the past where we've needed to call on. Well, we also do redundancy with other local fish stores or things like that. So Anya, that you had on the show a little while ago, we share corals for backup for redundancy as well. It's just I guess it's a commonly done thing among hobbyists, but among farms and shops, you probably don't hear of it too much.
Yeah, I see both Amanda and Chris Meckley from ACI in the house, and Chris and I were talking about Reefer's Code. So that sounds like what you're talking about in terms of just kind of making sure that you're banking corals with another shop, reef keeping buddy, what have you. But it's a great idea.
Yeah, definitely. And the amount of times that we've had to call upon that, and vice versa, we always, if someone loses their coral, don't worry, I got you. There's another one here.
So Joshua J is asking, how much biological media surface area is there compared to the total liters of the farm?
Surface area, I have no idea, but on rough calculations that I did a few weeks ago, there's about 1 liter of media, whether that be ceramic media or volcanic rock. We actually have a really clean supply of volcanic rock here. And it doesn't leach anything into the water like irons and manganeses and stuff. It does at the start, but it doesn't leach anything toxic into the water. So we have a really clean supply of that. But yeah, for 1 litre of media, there's roughly 27 litres of water. So there is quite a lot of biomedia in this system.
Like,
and we do feed heavily as well.
Gotcha.
And that tower is completely full of Maxspect ceramic balls. And then in that big black sump with the big tall skimmer in it, there's quite a lot of baskets that are all covered in aeration under there. So we aerate the media and keep it all the air bubbles basically clean it.
Gotcha. And that's your primary source in terms of the filtration for the system, in terms of biological?
Yeah. We don't really carbon dose too much intentionally, like vodka, vinegar, sugar, anything like that. We don't really need to. It's there's no phosphate reduction. The media handles everything. I'm consistently on 0 phosphate, so I can feed a lot, and that's just entirely due to the media. So.
Gotcha. NSB Reefs, what would Shane use to filter less than ideal ocean water? I heard him mention micron filtering.
Yeah, so we've got you can buy these, they're basically a tube that you plumb water in the top and then back out the bottom. And they take, think of them like a canister filter, and they take the filter socks, and they're a micron bag, so we can filter down to 1 micron. And they just stack micron bags on top of each other, and you just pass the 5,000 litres through it as a cycle. And yeah, that filters out little bits and pieces of anything that we don't want in there. We also shock the water with hydrogen peroxide as well. We use a 50% hydrogen peroxide, and then tip I think about 500 mils. It's 1 mil per 100 litres in that, and we just shock it, and then we aerate it and get the hydrogen peroxide out once it decomposes everything. So that's how we clean our water like that.
Interesting. I've never heard that term, shocking the water with hydrogen peroxide. That's an interesting thing to do there.
Yeah, I think it comes from shocking. Yeah, so in swimming pools, we call it shocking with chlorine. So in the swimming pool thing, like when you need to shock your swimming pool, they call it shocking it with chlorine. So I think that's just we've just adapted it from that. That's all.
So Amanda Meckley is asking, "Are you a halide guy?" So we saw the LED strips, but I think we saw some halides right over the few of those.
They're actually a Maxspect Canon, we call them. I think they're 500 watts. They're just like a single LED chip, kind of similar to what Kessel make, but they're the Maxspect version of them. I quite like them, but I'm not sure. We got those secondhand off I guess it's a private aquarium, but a very large one up here, and they were changing their lights up, and we thought we'd just give them a go because they were quite cheap. I'm not sure what they retail at normally for the average aquarist, but they were pretty cheap for us, so we decided to give them a go. And I like them. They're pretty good. They're very simple. They're much like the old original Kessel 350s with just the blue and the white knob. You can turn one up and one down like that's, or they're individually controllable on a blue and white channel, and that's it. No fancy function.
I want to ask you a couple more questions about lighting, but Andy Bauman is asking, do you shock the water to avoid bacterial issues? Is that what you're doing that for?
Yeah, that and algae. So yeah, Octopus and all those things. Hydrogen peroxide tends to pretty much nuke a lot of those things and oxidize it to kill it off. Snail eggs, anything that could be free floating in that water, because it is natural and there are risks with using natural water. I mean, the chemistry of it's quite good, but yeah, we don't know what's in it, so we filter it, shock it, and then wait a little while, and then it's ready to use.
So when you bring, now it sounds like you're not bringing in any more wild corals, but I'm assuming that you're bringing in some corals from different facilities or maybe other people in terms of swapping corals and whatnot. And when you do that, what's your protocol in terms? Do you do anything to try to prevent any bad bacteria from getting into your systems? Do you do any bacterial dips for those corals that are coming into your systems?
Yeah, so we've got a little bit of a quarantine system in the front there. It's very simple, just like a little 4-foot tank. And that's the quarantine tank. And as for, like, they'll sit in there for a couple of months if need be, just to check that no weird algae grows on them, or they didn't come in with flatworms or something like that. So yeah, it's just a quarantine period. We don't treat prophylactically with any dips unless we need to. Like, if something arises, then we'll treat it, but we don't really treat because.
But you're not doing any preventative bacterial dips.
Not unless we need
Okay.
to, because like if something, because it sits in the quarantine system for a couple of months, if something was nasty on that, we're going to see it in that time anyway. And if something comes up, we usually just yeet the coral anyway and get a better version of it.
Gotcha.
But yeah, if it's salvageable, then yeah, I'll do some treatments with usually an iodine-based dip. If it's bacterial, or if it's possible to save, some things you just, no matter what you do, whether if it's got brown jelly, I used to try and save, but it's just not. Yeah,
it's
not worth the time.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah.
So
cut the loss.
What pests do you fear the most in terms of hitchhiking? You know, in on corals.
So originally, when I first started here, all of the systems were linked as one system, and we had, and this is why we're wild collecting as well. So, just mainly for the purpose of filling up the systems, but we had an acro-eating flatworm outbreak among the farmed acros, and that was just devastating. So we spent probably a year dipping corals, just constantly shaking them off, trimming them, removing eggs. And when you've got about 5,000 mother colonies, it's impossible. Wow. So the solution to fixing Acropora eating flatworm was isolating the system and tipping bleach in it.
Wow. That's
the only way. And in my honest opinion, there is no possible way to fix acro eating flatworm. That is the scariest thing for us.
Yeah.
We spent a lot of time, my solution to fixing acro eating flatworm is removing the food source. If there's no acro, there's no acro eating flatworm. And that's exactly how we had to fix it. We literally deleted everything that was Acropora, waited about 6 months before any acro went back in that system. And in that time, we separated the systems. So I split them down the middle and made that new filtration system in the corner and started from scratch, bleached 3 big systems and threw everything out because it was all acro. There's no saving it. It's just not worth the trouble. But to see that, absolutely heartbreaking, to see all that hours and hours, years of work from acro eating flatworm. The next most horrible pest we've had to deal with, which met with the same solution, no food, no food source, no pest, was Monty eating nudibranchs.
Those are tough.
And we could spend hours each day. So the only option was to remove the food source, and it worked. Like, we have no pests now. So and now then those 2 big events in the history of Sustainable Reefs were the catalyst for a proper quarantine system, whereas we usually just used an incoming dip bucket and a visual inspection. But you're always going to miss something. So
it's tough.
Yeah, now that's not possible.
It's tough.
So, yeah. Yep.
So I see Chris mentions peppermint shrimp. I know that Chris has had luck with the peppermint shrimp in terms of being a natural predator for the acro-eating flatworms. But I guess there's a particular type of peppermint shrimps. Have you ever guys tried that? And I think he mentions there's an Aussie species that's the best.
We have, I think you've got Lismata wordamani is your species, and we've got Lismata vittata. I don't actually know if there is difference in what they eat. But again, we did try them, and acquiring the numbers of them that would get it, I think they might just keep it under control, but never actually cure it. And I think that's the case with any biological control. No creature is ever going to eradicate every last possible one, especially when you're dealing with little babies all over the acro. And also, if your acro has ever encrusted the egg crate, this is in a farm situation, then these shrimps and fish, they can't get in and around the egg crate. So that's like kind of a bit of a procedure that we do now. We swap the egg crate trays out to brand new fresh ones, so there's no coral touching them, and that way we know if there is any pests. So we regularly do the tray swap. We put the trays in acid to dissolve the coralline off them and the coral that's grown off onto them. Just another part of the protocol to keep things clean and pest free.
Yeah, for sure. So Amanda is asking, what are the most common pests that come in on LPS corals? Is it flatworms?
Yeah, flatworms on euphyllias and fimbriaphyllias. They're pretty common. Lithophaga boring mussels are practically in every coral in the skeleton, and I still think they're the leading cause of most singular polyp coral death, like Scully and Desh. I trim the skeletons off to remove any of those and make sure that those aren't in there. But yeah, that and I just say algae. Like algae as an introduced pest or hitchhiker is probably one of the most overlooked as well. It can sometimes just be a tiny little, like a root or a little tiny nub of an invasive macroalgae, and before you know it, you've got it everywhere. And then you've got to put, like some people will suggest, a rabbit fish or something. It's like, if you just trimmed the rock off to start with, you don't have that problem. And that's another part of the quarantine procedure. Like a coral doesn't go into our quarantine tank without a complete trim down. Like every part, if it's not coral and not directly needed by that coral, it goes. It's straight on the saw. So what I mean by not directly needed by that coral is obviously you've got a lot of skeleton that the flesh is attached to, and that is needed by the coral. But if you go down a few millimeters into where the skeleton is essentially live rock, then that's not needed by the tissue. The tissue is not hanging on much further than a few millimeters down. So we remove everything that is not coral: sponges, algae, coralline algae, old rock that's attached to the, like, deeper down past the polyp. Just remove the lot, and that eliminates a lot of pest algae issues as well.
So what happens if something slipped through the cracks? Like, let's say you get Bryopsis into the system. You know, Bryopsis is always something that's very tough to get rid of. There's like no natural predators. I mean, what's your approach in terms of Bryopsis? Do you guys, use chemicals in that case?
We have used fluconazole in the past, and I don't know whether, and it's come back in past times. And then within the tank moving and shutdowns, it's been treated and gone for now, hopefully. But that is always in the back of our mind that something like that can come back. And funny you should mention that, is I have another test tank out there that's actually full of Bryopsis at the moment. And I've been tracking down pieces of Bryopsis from local reefers. If they have it in their tank, I've been like, hey, can I just grab that bit of rock with that on it, and I put it in there? Because I'm currently going through some methods that also some treatments, and urchins. There's supposed to be a few species of urchin that are supposed to destroy it. And I just recently heard a species of hermit crab that not only just knocks it off the top, but eats the root part out as well. So I'm trying to get my hands on some of those and just try some natural methods and hopefully confirm or deny some of these theories or anecdotes that certain things eat them. I've even heard of a reefer down in Brisbane, at the other end of the state, where Anya is. He has a rabbit fish that eats Bryopsis.
I've heard that.
And
that they can, yeah.
So, we've tried rabbit fish and they don't eat it for us. So we don't know whether it's based on an individual fish. Same as I've had blue tangs that eat zoas. So it's like
collateral damage.
Yeah.
Let's see here. So all right, let's another question here. Becca Bitts was asking, what kind of water testing do you do and how often? So what's important for you guys in terms of parameters and water testing and all that sort of thing?
All of it. It's we use Triton, so we're lucky enough to have Triton. When Isan moved to Australia from his German lab, he actually just moved 10 minutes down the road from us. So they moved to Cairns to do some more left of field studying of the reef, and I'm not sure whether you've been able to catch any of the talks or any of the things that Julian or Isan have done about their intentions for moving to North Queensland, but they're going to be testing some really cool stuff, and we're doing a little bit with them as well. Like one coming up is Wyre's Tubipora skeleton red. Just doing some little investigations on just things like that they're a bit amusing and education as well. But yeah, so we use Triton and we test all of the elements that Triton do, and we follow all of the. But of course, we use our own chemicals to adjust and everything. But we use their ICP service for that. We also have like all your basic testing equipment here. We use a lot of Salifert. We have some ion selective probes that we use, but none of those are currently in calibration. But otherwise, we pretty much run our reef tanks like you'd expect to see one of your hardcore reefers testing and chasing elements, but we don't chase them too much. If you chase numbers, you'll never catch them.
Yeah.
So yeah, you got to find that balance between adding your elements for their use, but not chasing a number with them. There's certain elements like manganese that you can add that and add it and add it and add it more, and you just almost never see a reading on it. But as long as you're adding it so that you put it in, and that's about all. Like, we're happy with that because it's just one of those elements that burns out so quickly that it's not worth chasing. And if you do chase it, you'll poison your tank out.
That's not good. I want to thank Luis for his super chat. I'm going to get to the comment and the question right after we finish talking about water testing. But what in terms of the key elements that you guys pay attention to? So do you do like monthly ICP testing and then change dosing accordingly? And if that's the case, what when you get back those Triton tests, what do you kind of focus on first in terms of the key elements that are most important to you?
So I mean, we try for monthly. We can do earlier, but for the most part, we do a lot of visual like visual looking as well. Like after looking at corals so long and all day, there's like certain elements that we can go, yeah, I think bromide's a bit low because of this or that. Yeah, but yeah, at least monthly ICP, and then we do some adjusting. We've got the Apex Tridents running on that for just testing. We don't let them control anything. So the calcium, alkalinity, and magnesium are tested by the Tridents every 4 hours, and so we dose that. So we adjust our dosing based on what the Trident tells us of our calcium, alkalinity, and magnesium consumption is, and using the Coral Essentials stuff there, we've got it in 200-litre drums that we behind the other wall behind me, and that's pretty elementally balanced anyway, so we don't usually have to make too many big adjustments with the results from an ICP test. It's usually very minor adjustments, usually bromide, strontium, potassium, sometimes iodine. It's about the most common ones we need to adjust across the different tanks depending on what we grow in them.
Gotcha. Do you guys look at fluoride? I know Chris. I was talking with Chris Meckley, and I know he doses fluoride, and I started dosing fluoride, and man, the blue tips on some of my acros are seriously popping.
Yeah, we definitely advocate for fluoride. So we use an ion selective probe for that. When admittedly, we haven't tested that in probably a couple of months. So we do advocate for at least dosing for the bare minimum or just adding some at least. Adding none is you as you notice, you get a lot of more dull colors, blues and purples. But yeah, if you're at least just adding some, your coral's going to benefit. But yeah, if your ICP service doesn't actually test for fluoride, then it can make it difficult, and you're just guessing a little bit. But yeah, that's why we have the ion selective probe for that one.
So in terms of like calcium, alkalinity, magnesium, what do you guys like in terms of ranges? Do you try to like mimic what's natural seawater, or are you going in a different direction, targeting other levels?
Yeah, because we use natural seawater, we kind of target what in that 5,000 litre drum downstairs. That we kind of target what that is, which is pretty consistently around 420 calcium, about 1350 mag, and alkalinity is usually around 7.5. But we do see that lower. And the alkalinity though, the calcium we target usually around 420 odd, magnesium around 1350. The alkalinity though, we do bump up in the drum, so we bump that up before we add, so we buffer it before we do any water changes. Otherwise, the alkalinity is around 8.5, 9, just sort of mid-range between what's acceptable.
Yeah, Chris says fluorine is scary since it is so hard to test, but 100% necessary in his opinion.
Yeah, definitely agree. And yeah, and because it's hard to test, like we just find adding the smallest amount, so the bare minimum each day, and that way you it's underdosing, but at least it's there.
Yeah, Andy Bauma is saying that Fauna Marine and Oshimo test for fluoride.
Yeah.
Triton does not test for fluoride.
No.
Yep.
Not at this stage, anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's interesting. I guess you got to just be very careful with that if you're going to be dosing it.
I believe it's actually not testable in ICP. I could be wrong on that, but I believe that it's not actually an ICP test that's done when they test for fluoride. I could be wrong on that, so don't hold me to it. And so I think that's why Triton actually doesn't do it, because it's either a different machine and it's just not like time feasible.
Yeah, I think Chris is saying the only way to test it is with I don't know what this is, LCSMS or ICP-MS.
Yeah, so Matt, the ICP-MS is the mass spectrometer, so the next one up. But also, yeah, even those, they're running seawater through one of those machines. Most labs just go, whoa, no. they're very, yeah. So
quickly, in terms of what we're talking about, you were talking about, you know, the alkalinity, calcium, magnesium. You mentioned before that a lot of times you're at zero phosphate. Nitrate, what are you guys usually at with nitrate?
The SPS system down the far end, that's dosed. Actually, that's dosed for phosphate and nitrate. We have to add both of those in because the feeding doesn't keep up. But I think that one's running at 2 ppm nitrate consistently, and that dose of it. And I think my system was probably been a couple of weeks since I've tested nitrate, but it's usually a waste of time for me. That's pretty stable. But I think that's about 2 or 3 ppm as well. And the phosphate's generally 0, like I was saying before. But I feed about 500 grams of food a day. And that's between dry powderized ingredients, dried phytoplankton, and I use wet. Well, they're whole seafood, so fish fillets, sardines, not the edible sardines, the pilchard style large ones, that and shellfish, and I just put it in a NutriBullet or blender and just turn it to a paste, and I feed that to my system, as I call it. So yeah, my system has all the squishy LPS corals in it, and my boss's system has the acro. We have different things that we focus on. Even though we're both in each other's systems, we just have this notion that it's mine and his. So.
What about live phytoplankton? Do you guys dose any of that?
No, I would like to, but it's just one of those things. It's like, how much more can I cram into the
The
day?
pain in the ass to grow,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
to culture it.
Oh yeah, we've had all the culture barrels and the lights and all that are sitting upstairs covered in dust because we have done it here. And the amount of times you come in the morning and the culture's crashed, it's like, why do I bother? I'll just use dried phytoplankton, done. Someone else grows it and I don't have to have a headache for it. But yeah, I imagine it would be very slightly better. But for the exercise sake and the time consuming nature of growing phytoplankton, nope, absolutely not. Not here.
Yeah, I just started growing it. I've had this guest on, Dong Zhou, who is a scientist, and he we talked about growing live phyto and you know, on the show, and then I kind of followed up and made sure I had all the methodology down. But you know, I only have like 800 gallons of water in my two systems, so it's not like I have to grow a crazy amount of live phyto. But I've been doing it for like a couple of months. So far, you know, it's about 45 minutes of per week in terms of all the you know, cleaning and then setting up new cultures. So, but yeah, I could see for a large commercial scale system like yours, man, that would be you need to hire a person to do that, you know. Might as well just buy it.
That's exactly right. Like we're almost at that point now where just the daily tasks get out of hand, and because we're online so much as well, like with the Coral Essentials, we have a huge online presence helping people out. So you see, I've got the phone that I'm streaming on now. I'm ambidextrous, by the way, and I have two phones, and I'm switching between typing between them, answering questions all day. Boss is on the same sort of level. We've got other helpers, and like you factor that in with just trying to do water changes or fragging corals, and you're just running around all day. So we try and limit everything. We try and do is lazy. We have to be lazy or thoughtful to be lazy, to maximize what we can actually do in a day, because this time blows out so quickly.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so I want to get to Luis Aceves' question. Hopefully, I pronounced the last name correctly. So the comment question: was Shane the one to cut a scolie in half and find those burrowing worms? How can you tell if a scolie has them? Oh, next time in Denver, don't leave early so we can do that shot of tequila with Meckley.
Yeah, well, on that last bit, I wish I was actually going. I wish I went to Denver this year. It's like I was on the fence about going, and then in the end, I was like, "Oh no, I've got too much here to do." But yeah, next year
It was
definitely.
a great show. I was there. It was awesome.
Yeah. But yeah, as for the scolies and that, I've been cutting them for years, and I've tried the grafting and like sticking them together. They don't grow back together; they just form two separate pieces and whatnot. But yeah, it's actually the worm you're referring to is actually a lithophaga boring mussel. So they're much like the mussel that you can eat, but they're smaller. They secrete an acid, and they dissolve the skeleton in the base of the coral, and then they have this little tongue type thing that they spit out into the flesh of the coral, and they irritate it, and then they feed on the coral slime. And yeah, so you might have seen a video of that that Jamie Frags had up in his Macna talk, because he hit me up about it. So I had a video, so he included that. And I'm a huge advocate of cleaning all of the excess skeleton off solitary polyp corals, because I would say at least 95% of all of them, and just it doesn't have to be solitary polyp. Like I've seen them in all types of corals, but they're the ones that are affected the most. And yeah, how you tell that they're in there is if you've got a scolie going back. Well, I'll just use scolie for example, but this applies to Desh, Sinarina. There's so many solitary polyp corals around, and they generally just recede in from the outside, and they're just looking a lot flatter than they were. And it happens a few months after you get them, because, well, I shouldn't say because that infers that this is 100% proven, but my theory as to why it's happening is in the natural reef, corals regrow a hell of a lot faster than what they will in aquariums. So this irritation that's caused by the mussel up in underneath the coral will get a chance to heal out in the ocean, and the coral has food available all the time. These solitary polyp corals are almost out feeding all of the time. So they're getting this nutrition that they need to repair the damage that these mussels are doing. And a lot of the time they can actually outgrow the mussels. And you can see that in older growth skeleton. So where the polyp's sitting up on top and you've got a lot of old skeleton, because a lot of corals, they stack, it's called patellate growth. You can see right down in the bottom, you've got the fleshy polyp up here, and right down in the bottom, you can actually see dead lithophaga mussels where the coral has outgrown it faster than what that mussel can irritate it. But in the aquarium, we are not getting that growth. Even on the farm, you don't get the growth that you would in the wild. So these corals actually irritate these lithophaga irritate the corals faster than they can grow. And then the coral, instead of using this, you can feed it, you can give it amino acids, you can have the perfect water quality. But the energy that coral is using to repair the damage and make slime for this lithophaga to live on is not being used to grow. So it's just using it to repair. And a lot of the times the coral just goes backwards and starts receding into the middle. So my advice, if you have a coral that's receding into the middle, find someone with a bandsaw and trim away all the skeleton and then angle it right back into the skeleton cut, angle it back into the bottom underneath the mouth and just see what you find. If that scully, for example, is sitting on a big rock, get rid of the rock immediately. It all has to go. If it's not coral and not related directly to the coral, there's a really good chance you have a lithophaga in there.
How common is it for those things to kind of spread from one coral to the next? You know, if you have it in an aquarium,
I don't think it's happened. It's the same probability of a giant clam spawning in your tank. If you've got giant clams spawning in your tank and you just so happen to have baby giant clams pop up, they're a mollusk and they spawn exactly the same way as other mollusks. So I think the probability of having baby lithophaga popping up all through your system is next to nothing, because we don't have that happening with clams really. So
Gotcha. Interesting. It's just you know, there's just so many pests out there that you have to worry about, and it seems like there's some new ones that kind of pop up here and there, and it's Mother Nature, right, man? It's like you got you know, you can't keep all the bad critters out of a captive reef system. It's part of nature.
I just noticed Amanda Meckley said that would be a great article to post on Reef Builders. I believe Vincent Chalet has covered that after a chat a little while ago as well. I don't know how in depth. I'd have to dig back and find the article again and see if it needs recovering again. Maybe Vincent would be up to doing an update if it needs one, or I can cover it again. But yeah, more than happy to, because I think it is a fairly common issue with wild collected solitary polyp corals. I also find them in hammer corals and torches a little bit as well, but not nearly as common as scollies and dash.
I mean, how common is that, like for scollies? You know, to what percentage scollies might be infected by that sort of pest?
When I was working for collectors that collected scollies predominantly, or so you got different zones of the reef or different like latitudes where different corals are found, and your scollies are typically found off the central coast of Queensland. So different collectors tend to have different access to corals. So collectors on the central coast don't get very good acro typically, whereas up here we get the better acro and we don't get any scollies if you're a wild collector. So when I worked down there, it's not uncommon to bring back 500 to 1,000 scollies in a few-day trip. And when you're trimming the corals back at the facility, I would say at least 8 out of 10 have got lithophaga in them. And usually they're trimmed off by the collector, but sometimes they're not. And yeah, you might have one.
Gotcha. So this is like more of a general question for you. You know, so for the wild corals that you had collected in the past, you know, can you know, and you've done a lot of diving. I assume. Can you kind of speak to the habitat details and conditions that all these corals live in? Like, for instance, the scoles and the LPS and SPS. What have you observed in terms of kind of like their natural habitat?
I think for the most part, corals are quite adaptable within a range, of course. But like I was saying just before, about there's a lot of Acropora species coming out of here. It's almost unheard of that Homophilia australis, or your scolie, is collected much further north of where they are now. You get the odd few, and maybe up here, collectors would be lucky to get one a dive because they just don't really exist up here, where they are in numbers down south. But so there's the habitats, the corals across the board are quite adaptable to different habitats, but I've certainly seen certain things about those habitats that make those certain corals better. So upper reef slope acroporas like Spaculata, Microlados, which is your strawberry shortcake, they are in heavy wave crashing zones, and they ideally would have a lot of light and a lot of water flow and a lot of oxygen in the water. And other things that a lot of people might not be aware of, your acan lords, Micromusa lordoensis and scolies, and a lot of the hammer corals actually thrive better in cooler water. So off the top of my head, I can't quite convert it into Fahrenheit, but 25 to 26 degree water is the acceptable range. And it's about sort of 20 degrees is the common water temperature for most of the year down in those southern reefs, and it can get even colder as well. Like I've been nearly hypothermic, cold, shivering on the deck of these boats above water, and that's where a lot of these corals are coming from. So I've done some experiments quite a few years ago now by running my tank at 21 to 22 degrees, and I actually seen way better responses from these cooler water corals. So they certainly do better with the temperature ranges they're found, and sometimes it could be the items of food that are there, whether that coral is near a river and it gets lots of planktons washing out of the river. But yeah, for the most part, adaptable, but they certainly would benefit if you've got a species-only tank to chase that biotope of the area they're found in.
Gotcha. Makes sense. You mentioned light, and I wanted to ask you this question before when we were talking about the different types of lighting that you're using in your facility there. But what do you guys try to key in on in terms of the lighting? Do you lean on spectrum? You think that's more important versus like PAR, or do you try to kind of take both of those things into the equation when you're determining the lighting for specific corals?
Yeah, I don't how I was saying before about for what I call my system and Christian's system, with the acro and everything, you'll notice there's a lot more light and those big Maxspect cannons. There was just a hell of a lot more light over the SPS system, and that's pretty widely accepted that they need that. Yeah. And you notice that I was only using the Illumagic Vitamin E strips over my system, and that's because I don't really hold much merit to light in aquariums versus water quality. I never really have. And for the majority of my system is LPS, and the 90 par I think I get out of those vitamin E strips, they are pretty close to the water, and the water is shallow, so I'm getting 90 par at the coral, and that to me is fine. I'm getting really good color out of that, and the rest of it I base on water quality and feeding. But if I crank the light up a lot more, I don't notice it too much. Zoanthids, I get better color with more light in most cases. So there's some zoas that I'll put under a heavier light just because they look better for sale. But for the most part, I haven't actually noticed to pull a coral, say a lot of the Fabias, I can put them under 400 par or 90 par, and then put them side by side after a few weeks, and I really can't tell the difference. So that's why I use just the LED strips to grow under.
Gotcha. Rob, upstate New York, thank you so much, man, for that super chat. Comment is great. Chat, always learning. Appreciate that. One thing I also forgot to ask you about in terms of pH. How what do you guys typically keep your pH at in your facility in the different systems?
Actually, our systems run really high pH, and this is a lot of people just go, "Nah, it's out of calibration. Your probes don't work." But no, they are actually calibrated, and our system is running 9.3 pH, or all of them run 9.38. That's because of the huge surface area. They're flat tanks, and that's all we can attribute it to is there's a lot of oxygen exchange or something going on there. But they've always been steadily 9.1 to 9.3. That's our fluctuation, and they're always there like that.
Wow.
So yeah, we've tried doing CO2 dosing. We've got a bottle down there, and it didn't really budget much. So it's like we just give up.
That's super
we don't
high,
have a problem
man.
with it. So yeah, it really is.
Wow.
So yeah, that mostly gets met with no, you need to calibrate the probes. I'm like, they really are. They're calibrated.
So obviously you're not doing anything in terms of trying to elevate that pH. It's naturally elevated.
Yeah, that's just all how it is. Chris has just asked about do we still run our potassium at 500 to 550? I would have to ask him. I know mine is running around 430 at the moment. I know he used to play with certain elements, and I don't know what his system is running at the moment. I'd have to ask him. I'm not sure. I did hear him upstairs before, but if he pops back in, I'll ask him. But I do know that he likes to play God a lot with corals. So which is all part of the R&D of everything, I guess, is to see what makes things tick. And I know he was running K really high for a while, but whether he still is, I'm not sure.
Yeah, can you share some specifics in terms of you mentioned before that you guys are testing chemicals a lot and what have you? What anything specific that you could share in terms of what you're testing right now?
Mainly the effects of ultra high dosages of things. So we get like kind of like, say, a customer will come back and say, oh, like my chromium is elevated through the roof. So we've tested this one already, but we will put a bunch of corals from our system into those little test tanks, and we'll just slowly just add more chromium, and it bleaches corals. That's what that does. It's just an teleregulator. But we can test anything. The next one I actually want to test, and we're gonna chat to the boys at Triton about this because we have the ability to test elements. Neodymium. I've had a pretty strong correlation in people's aquariums, and actually I would love to see if any one of your followers and listeners have noticed. So this is only to see if there's a correlation between corroded and rusty magnets in your aquarium with dead corals. And I know this is a topic that's been brought up a lot, but I would love to test and see the actual. So neodymium is what the magnets are typically made of. It's neodymium alloy, usually with iron and boron, I think. And I want to know if there is a neodymium like poisoning level, like what level of neodymium is actually toxic to corals, because no ICP provider currently tests for it, but it's in almost everyone's tanks, and a lot of these magnets are exposed. So I have a feeling that it's quite a toxic element in high levels. So that's the next one I'll be testing.
Interesting. So you got like a little mini lab going on there.
Yeah. Oh, up here used to be a big lab. Now it's an empty room.
What about
it was the CE side of it. Now that's down in Brisbane. So.
What about when you get RTN, STN episodes? You know, is that something that you guys are trying to, try to dig into a little bit more to try to better understand what causes that sort of thing? I mean, obviously it's a bacterial issue, but there's a company here, Aquabiomics, that we can utilize to send in a water sample and get tests back and see the different strains of bacteria, and you can see if you got any pathogenic bacteria. But is there anything that you guys are kind of like doing on that front in terms of R&D, try to better understand RTN, STN episodes?
I would love to dabble in it. For me to do that, though, I would need to get a much better microscope and be able to kind of see what's going on. But for now, the only thing I know about RTN and STN is what other people have told me. And more to reflect on me personally and what I call my corals and my system is the brown jelly. I'd love to know more about that. It's something that I could add it to my to-do list and whether I ever get around to it. And see what makes brown jelly tick and see if there's different strains of the bacteria that are causing it, that kind of thing. That to me, but the RTN and STN, it more refers to your SPS. So, and which don't really interest me. They don't really bring me joy each day. So, I tend to focus my time on squishy things and LPS. So.
Everybody has their thing, right, man? It's just
That's right.
I happen to be a stickhead, but there's a lot more out there than acros, but it's whatever floats your boat, so to speak.
Yeah.
You mentioned, all right, so we were just talking about bacteria and all that stuff, and this goes back to a question NSB Reese had a while ago. I'm just getting into it. What about the use of UV? Do you guys use UV in your systems?
Yeah, I think it's 150 watt Emperor Cortex. We've got one of those on each system, and they run 24/7. So,
gotcha. There's a question from Martin Valencourt, I believe that's how you pronounce it. If we stay on the topic of chemistry, can we discuss the impact of elevated calcium on SPS corals? Can it cause STN if above 550? Interesting question. Hard to answer, probably.
Yeah, I'm trying to actually. This is one of the reasons I set up these test tanks is to individually elevate certain elements, and we haven't directly tested calcium in itself for super high levels, but I wouldn't ever run it much more than 500 anyway. So, but yeah, if you did have it at 500, I don't see a point, unless it was accidental, of course. I don't see a point to it, and I would suggest that there would be detrimental issues. You're not going to see a faster growth or anything like giving it more food or more building blocks, calcium and all that. I don't think you're going to see any benefit to it. It's only going to be detrimental. There are certain elements that we can bump up a little bit to with color. Like I like my bromide a little bit higher. I like my boron a little bit higher. Strontium a little bit higher. But otherwise, we're not talking big numbers here. And I think from normal range, like I try and keep 420 parts per million, I think a jump up to 550 is way too much. So yeah, I think 480 is the highest my system's ever been. So yeah, I wouldn't do it intentionally, that's for sure.
Yeah, I see they're talking about doing water changes to get it down, and that actually was a question that Andy Bauman had before in terms of how often do you change over the water, and I guess I would add to that, what percentage of a water change do you do, and how, in terms of the on top of that frequency.
I like this topic of what percentage of water changes do you do. So if you've got a big problem in your aquarium, then kind of a gross analogy. If you peed in the bath, would you want to change all of it or 10% of it? It's like,
I would change all of it.
Yeah.
That's me personally, but it's
Yeah. I'm sure there's some people out there, but we won't go there. Basically, if I've got a problem in my system, I dump the lot and start again, or at least as much as I can. But to do that, you've got to, let's just use calcium as an example like we were before. So if calcium went up to 550, and I don't know why, let's just say the dosing pump decided to go and dump a whole lot in for no reason, and I went into damage control and I want to do a water change, I I'd change all my water out, but I would try my best to match the parameters that I had beforehand, minus the calcium. So if my alkalinity was on 9, I would buffer my water change water to 9. If my magnesium was on 1320, I would buffer it to 1320. Easier when it's on the low side to start with, but yeah, I'm all for doing a massive water change if you have a massive problem.
Gotcha. We got some more random questions coming in, and Chris from ACI is asking, have you correlated dinos with low iron? Not all dinos, but I guess certain strains.
I don't think I've really ever had. Well, I say low iron, but we're always dosing it so it exists, but never chasing the number. I don't think I've ever had a Triton result come back with iron present. It's always undetectable.
It's always right.
So yeah, it just burns out too quickly. So I don't think I can ever recall an iron level being detectable, but we do add it. So I also haven't had dinos. So in this system, I've had dinos in my home aquarium many years ago. If we stop dosing iron, I don't know if we would see dinos appear, or whether that's anecdotal. I'm not sure.
Yeah, see, Reef to see forever. Iron is always 0 on Triton, and yeah, I think pretty much every ICP that I've ever gotten, maybe a couple of times I've seen some iron, but it always seems to be 0. And I guess the key there, and this is something that Chris told me, is to try to dose it 24/7, whatever you're dosing.
Yeah, it's also different types of iron as well. Like there's in its different forms, like elemental forms. So trying to whether it be iron sulfate, iron 2 sulfate, there's just like different types of iron. So as with a lot of elements.
Yeah, folks, keep dropping questions in the chat. I'm gonna change gears a little bit here. And Shane, ask you, so Jake Adams was the one that turned me on to you. He was like, you got to get Shane on. You got to get Shane on. And so I'm curious, how did you guys meet?
It was all, I guess, social media. And it was he searched out who was doing what in Australia, because I think it was Delua Anthony Blinoff that was over at Reefstock Denver about 4 odd years ago now, and said you should bring Reefstock to Australia. And then he's like, yep, ideas. So where we to search out and give it a hand to get Reefstock off the ground and do some promotion and things like that. We sort of just started talking a lot more then. But yeah, that was sort of where that relationship was made, through shows and social media. And then I went back over to Macna and did a presentation with him, I think in Vegas it was. Yeah, Vegas. And then Denver the year after. And I haven't been back to the States since, actually. So yeah, but it was pretty much about it. And yeah, we've just all through social media and what we do in the industry. Yeah.
Now it was the first time I'd been to Reefstock this year. It was a great show. But yeah, I have to look up those. I'm assuming your talks from Macna and Reefstock are online someplace, but probably good listening.
I don't think so.
Oh no.
So I actually tried to find the one from Vegas a while ago, and I don't think it was there. I think. I don't know. VRS used to be in charge of filming Macna. I'm not sure if they were even filming anyone that day. And I think Scott Mile High Reefer was filming in Denver. It was just a fragging, like what to do with fragging. It was real early on. So yeah, I don't think there's a copy of any of those around.
All right.
But, yeah.
That's a bummer. Yeah, any other questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. So you mentioned Dr. Dean Miller earlier there, Shane, the person I had on from the Living Coral Biobank and what have you. We talked about all the different bleaching events on the Great Barrier Reef. What's been your experience in terms of your diving and seeing bleaching events? Is that a lot more noticeable these days?
So I think the last major let's say the last major bleaching event was 4 or 5 years ago or something like that. And it was, so they come in waves, and for the most part, the recovery's been really good. There's a few reefs around that you wouldn't even know they were ever bleached.
That's good.
Because of the coral cover comes back quite strong. And we've got to remember too that bleaching doesn't mean death, as they can recover. The zooxanthellae can come back in the coral. It's if the heat is sustained for a couple of weeks, then the algae starts settling on top of the coral tissue, and then the undesirable algae, starts to kill off the coral underneath, and that's where you get the issues of death. And but yeah, there was a lot of bleaching a few years ago. You do get localized bleaching, certain reefs, just patches here and there, just bleach out. And I think that's the matter for all around the world. As for like stopping it, there's nothing anyone really can do. I shouldn't say that. There's a lot of things that humanity can do, but I don't think humanity is prepared to do what it actually takes. And that's pretty much take a step back in time 100 years ago before we, or over 100 years ago, is before we have all this industrial revolution. And if we're prepared to give up everything that we've got right now and go back to living in a cave, well, I think that's where the pollution stops. So, but yeah, no one that I know is prepared to do that. So I think the issues with I don't want to go down rabbit holes of what causes bleaching, but whatever people say, I think it's basically to do with humans. But one standout issue that I've found on the reef from diving locally is so up along the northern part of Australia is cane farms, sugarcane, and lots of land clearing happens from sugarcane. So the runoff and the sediment from the topsoil doesn't have the tree roots to hold the topsoil on. So, and we get a lot of flooding up here. We're in the middle of what's called wet season, where we consider ourselves much like a tropical Southeast Asian type thing, where we have monsoon season and dry season. And when it's monsoon season, which we're in the middle of right now, actually, no, we're coming into the end of monsoon season, and the rivers are just chocolate. Everything is just brown. All of the bays are just dirty. Everything is covered in mud and runoff and silt. So that poses probably one of the biggest risks to our local inshore reefs, where you could be diving along and you can fan dust off these corals because it's just so much dirt being washed out of the rivers, which I don't think would have happened at all if land clearing wasn't done for farmland. And that's, I think, one of the biggest really local issues. But bleaching events tend to happen more on the outer reef as well.
Gotcha. So, I don't want to get political here, but do you think the Australian government is doing what it can to help fight that fight?
It's always a funny topic here between different groups, whether they be like green groups or anything. Queensland has a massive deposits of coal and coal seam gas. So what's one of our biggest exports. So any of the politicians in power love the cash from that. So if you attribute burning coal, and again, like I'm not going to get into that, it's just a rabbit hole of what the hell. If you attribute that, then yes, the government is doing nothing there, but because they keep the coal open and whatnot. So but there's plenty of, I don't think money fixes anything, but they certainly have put taxes on a lot of things that cause pollution. So whether that money actually goes to making solutions, I don't know. I'm not too up on that, but I think farmland and stuff, if they can possibly make measures to catch runoff, that would be ideal. I know there's a lot of revegetation projects that I've been a part of myself, because I find that topic and that area of life quite important. So a lot of coastal revegetation projects happen in this area. So tree planting, basically, replanting the trees that were cleared to make cane land, but just replanting them on the edges to make like a barrier from the cane land. So a lot of the cane farmers are actually giving up some of their land to do this. So it's really good.
That's cool. Have you noticed any corals that were pretty common a few years ago that are not so common these days? Like anything stands out in your mind?
I think for the most part, the numbers are much the same. So just for like coral collection, I guess you'd say. I think the numbers for the most part are still really quite strong, and there's not really a decline. But I think the size of collected corals is getting smaller, particularly like Scully, for example. But we need to remember that the zones in which corals can be collected, it's not just open slather. You can't just get in a boat and go anywhere you want. There are zones that can be collected, and it's not like most of it is green. So we call them green zones. I'm not sure if you have a similar system in the States for waterways, but we have green zones, and you're not allowed to go in there. We've got other zones as well. There's like pink zones, which are research. So research vessels are the only ones allowed in there. But for the most part, most of our reef is like, we have massive green zones, and a lot of the good reefs are actually full protected by green zones. So where you might see a decline in a certain species of the size of it, say like Scullies used to be that big back in the day, and now you notice a lot of them are quite small. So whilst they might be getting smaller in those areas, the areas that are green zones are, I've dove them as well, and the numbers are plentiful, and the Scullies are gigantic. So,
Nice.
Yeah, that's about the only thing I can figure. But I don't think, wild collection or anything poses a risk to corals, and especially now, like there's the really, really, really heavy quota collection limits on the numbers of what can be collected. So there's even further protection there. I think Australia has probably one of the most heavily regulated fisheries for not just coral, but for everything. Even just like table fish, mackerel, and anything, like the fisheries here are really well regulated.
Makes sense. Quite the pristine, environment out there. Definitely worth doing that. So, I heard from Anya at Gallery Aquatica that you are the moderator, the biggest reef keeping Facebook page in Australia. What's that like, man? What are some of the common discussions? Clue us in terms of the mindset of the Australian reef keeper out there. What's on their minds these days?
For the most part, I think it's much the same. You get all the same sort of questions, but one of I really do enjoy watching comments from Aussies that say things like, "Oh, why do the Americans get all the good corals?" And it's just because, I don't know.
I would think it's the opposite
totally
thing, man.
It is. It 100% is. Like, I think it's just because we don't have a big reefing base in Australia. Like, I think the Facebook group's only got 15,000 people in it, which it's still fairly large. But of those people, I don't even know how many have an aquarium, have a reef tank. I mean, but
they're just causing trouble on Facebook. Is that what they're doing?
Yeah, just bigger populated areas like the States. So you got more people posting photos of corals. So you got that effect of people seeing more American or photos from around the world. Like just the German hobby base or the European hobby base in general is massive compared to us. So we're going to see these corals posted. And I mean, I can maybe count on one hand how many really nice coral photos are posted in Australia every day. And on the other hand, if you scroll down overseas Facebook groups and stuff, you're going to see a hell of a lot more. And I think that's just how that notion starts. But we do really have the best corals and the cheapest prices for everything. So,
Now, I remember my conversation with Anya. I guess there was in terms of Acropora, all the named Acropora that we have here, it seems like, I guess there is a little jealousy on the Aussies' part in terms of being able to have some of those captive raised SPS, and maybe that's not the case in Australia. I guess it's more, you guys are tapping into the wild collected stuff.
Yeah, so a lot of the times, something we've noticed here. So when we're wild collecting, we've got. It's pretty safe to assume a lot of the acroporas come from Australia anyway. There are a small number that come from Indo, like is it Little Red Ferrari or something, and Red Dragon acropora. That's classic. That's an Indonesian species, so we just don't have that here. But for the most part, they're coming from Australia and they're sent overseas, and then the Australians go, "Oh, vivid confetti," or home wrecker, and I'm like, man, that was collected here, and it was just cooked up in a tank for 10 years in America, and you guys have got you propagate through necessity, and you have done for many years. You're well ahead of the ball game over there with propagation and farming corals, because you couldn't just go and buy a giant colony of acro like we can here, but we get the wild forms. So now, after farming corals on this particular farm and just seeing it, we go and get a piece of tenuous from the wild a couple of years ago, and now we've got that growing out here, and you realize that looks a lot like home wrecker. And then and then other times we give them a funky name to put on our stock list, just because we can't just call it Acropora 1, Acropora 2. It's a bit boring and also hard to remember. So like a classic example, we made one, we call it Wonder Woman.
I've never heard of that one.
We've got a lot of superhero names in our stock list. And it is actually identical in every way, shape, and form to vivid confetti. So it's just, the corals don't really have much choice as to when they're cooked up in an aquarium, whether it's cooked up here or there, they generally end up the same. So what got called vivid confetti over there, we collected a wild version of it here. We grew it out for a while and called it Wonder Woman, and then you put them side by side, it's like, same thing. So I'm sure that happens a lot in the States as well, just between different farms and things like that.
It's like you got the same coral that's got 10 different names. The whole name the whole name game thing is like kind of hard.
It does. It's hard to keep up with, but yeah, a lot of times we get asked like, "Oh, why do we put names on it? They're stupid. I hate names," or something. I'm like, when you've got 350 different things on a stock list, we just need to have a bit of fun in our day and give it a name. And I just don't want to call it Acropora 1, Blaster Musa 2, and it just do my head in. So we give it a fun name, and it keeps our day slightly bright. Some of them our names are in jest of things that happen, or certain people we name our corals after as well.
Hey, man, you got to have fun with it, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's a hobby for it's not too serious.
Great Bearded Reef is asking the name of that Facebook page in case anybody wants to check it out. Is that a private group or is that a public group?
It's pretty much targeted at Australians, but I don't think so. Marine Aquarium Fanatics Australia, but yeah, it's a primarily Aussie group, and I think it's like 10 years ago or something it started, but yeah. Primarily Australians in there.
Gotcha. So, Shane, let's. I guess we should wrap it up. I know you probably are a very busy man there this Friday morning in Australia. What advice can you leave us with in terms of us reef keepers that want to kind of be able to get to that next level with reef keeping? What words of wisdom would you pass along, given your experience to farm there?
I would say just focus on your water quality and feeding. That's my two biggest things. Is if you want to see coral growth, you have to be feeding them and as well as your amino acids and vitamins and supplementing them for the corals that don't produce their own. That and your water quality. Those feeding and water quality to me are the pinnacle of reef keeping, and your lighting comes down a bit further, and flow is important. Yeah, like that. Feeding and water quality, that is where it's at. And if you can focus on those and really just get them dialed in, the other stuff just comes naturally, I think. So.
Cool. All right, man. Well, listen, Shane, this was an awesome chat. I learned a lot, and I think everybody was really into it as well. So thanks, man, for taking the time to join us.
No worries at all. It was fun to come on.
Yeah. Maybe if you make it to Denver one of these years, we'll run into each other.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'd say it would be next year. So
Cool.
yeah, we'll get over there.
All right, folks. Well, that's going to do it for this show. I want to thank Shane for being on the live stream. I also want to thank both Bulk Reef Supply and Ecotech Marine for sponsoring it and supporting the show. Also want to thank all of you out there for tuning in, especially the folks that made the contributions via the Super Chat. Thank you. Also, a big thank you to Paul, who is the moderator as well as the president of the Boston Reefer Society. Please join and support your local reefing clubs. They are so important to this hobby. Finally, I want to let you all know that all episodes of Rappin With ReefBum are available as podcasts on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and Amazon. My next Rappin With ReefBum live stream will be on Thursday, March 16th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time with Adam Derrickson from Battle Corals. So that should be another great show. I'm also having a live sale this Sunday on YouTube. Some great deals going on with some SPS frags, some LPS frags as well. That's Sunday, March 12th at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you want to check out the full schedule of upcoming guests for Rappin With ReefBum, visit reefbum.com under the YouTube section. So until next time, be safe and be well, and we'll see you next time. Adios.